Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming along this afternoon, and to everybody watching online, welcome. This is the first in-person event that the Urban Design Group has attempted with London Living Streets for a couple of years, and it's also our first hybrid event. So please bear with us if anything goes wrong. Perhaps standing a bit too close to the camera. It's a bit alarming for people online. Anyway, welcome. We've got 5 wonderful speakers lined up this afternoon. This is going to be the first in a series of events and summits on how to improve streets. And it's going to be a fairly controversial year and lively year this year, with the expected introduction of Manual for Streets 3. And you may have seen in the papers today, Hackney Council has decided to make 2/3 of the boroughs, or is it 3/4 of the boroughs' roads, part of a low traffic neighbourhood. You'll have also seen Rachel Aldred's research that was published about a fortnight ago that suggests that low traffic neighbourhoods, whilst they're roughly half traffic within the low traffic neighbourhoods, they don't appear to generate or divert traffic to any other areas. The roads on the periphery of the low traffic neighbourhoods, the traffic levels stay more or less the same. So welcome everybody, and may I introduce Dr. David Harrison, who's going to chair the event today, co-chair of London Living Streets, and a stalwart, an advocate of low traffic neighbourhoods, and an expert on medieval bridges and medieval transportation. Now, do we need to? Yep, we're all doing this well. If you'd like to stand in.
Thank you very much, Robert. I won't say very much, as you already had a brilliant introduction. We're looking forward to today. As Robert says, this will be the first event. We expect a series over the year. And I think the next one will be early March, when Professor Peter Jones from UCL will be one of the star speakers, talking about the nature of the street, what some people call the ecosystem of the street, whether they're designed for movement or for play, place, etc. As Robert mentioned, I am a bit of a historian of streets, and I suppose in looking at better streets, we're partly thinking of how we reverse the terrible last century when they've been changed and designed around the motor car. And who better to tell us about those changes than our first speaker, Councillor Adam Harrison, from Camden. And Camden have a great future high streets programme that I hope we'll be hearing more about and how it's going to go forward. And I just thought I'm reminded that Finchley Road, which is partly in Camden, isn't it, was built in the late 19th century and planted with trees. In the 1930s, it was described as a wonderful boulevard full of oaks and elms. And then the 60s came along and it was turned into a massive highway. So I look forward, Adam, to you hearing about how we may be going back to better days and better streets. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll just move this along, do I, presumably? It's funny you mentioned Finchley Road, actually. That was the subject of a debate on Monday at our full council, with all the political groups represented, with some of them opposing city plans for 20 miles an hour on Finchley Road and other red routes, which the council is going to support. And that same party had referenced in their election literature last year that Finchley Road should become a green boulevard once again. I think we're a bit distant on roads like that, but I'm going to talk a bit more about the roads that are directly under Camden's control rather than the TfL ones. Let's see if this works. Yeah, I think it was. I tried that one.
No, it's just because that.
Yeah, will do. I don't know, Chris.
It's right. It's just because the Zoom box was open.
Okay, right. Great, thank you. Sorry about that. So we're going to talk a bit about our high streets work, which is really embedded in all our wider safe and healthy streets work to transform our roads and our places in Camden. And there's huge amounts we can apply across the board on our high streets. You'll probably be familiar with the healthy streets And I think when you reread it, and particularly think about high streets, it really does come alive. It applies to any sort of street, of course, but the idea is about having things to see and do, people feeling safe, people choosing to walk and cycle there, streets being quiet. I think are really important for high streets as attractors and destinations for people. Just in terms of Camden's policy, we have very developed transport strategy, which we adopted in 2019, and lots of deliverables underneath that around electric vehicles, charging, and cycling action plan, and road safety, and so on. It's really always reference the policy because it's actually really important to have that really grounded, publicly accepted and democratically voted on document, actually, because when you take forward projects, it is important to have that reference and to have had that democratic support, and to be able to set out in your decision papers what your decisions are actually grounded in, as well as the evidence you're presenting for particular locations. And these are just some of the objectives. I'm not going to read them all out, but we do have, as I say, set out as our high-level ambitions to transform our streets and places. And at the bottom, we have an objective about supporting economic growth and regeneration. That's always been key for us as well. Just some of the other wider work is COVID was really transformational. We already had good policy in place, and we were delivering on cycle lanes and other measures. But you'll see since 2019, we've more than doubled the length of cycle lane in Camden. You can see, can't quite see, but the purple and the blue is much more extensive on the right after several years of work and really learning to operate at a higher speed, a higher pace, and trialing measures under experimental traffic order as well. It has been a really transformational few years for us. And again, some of the other work around low traffic neighbourhoods or smaller traffic restrictions, we've added about 20 or so in the last few years. There were, of course, already quite a few traffic restrictions in Camden that were historic, and nobody would ever want to see ripped out in the future. But we have made strong progress there. I'm going to come back to that. Some of the measures we brought in for high streets in particular, and again, this really gained pace during COVID, was streeteries, which is retaking largely parking spaces and allocating them for restaurants and cafes and so on. And this was facilitated, as much of it was in COVID, to be fair, by government changes in rules and funding. And for once, we had a government and many local authorities really aligned on some of this type of work. So you can see the bottom left example is Charlotte Street, where we've removed parking. We've placed now quite attractive street furniture for the tables and chairs. It wasn't like that a couple of years ago. We had the red and white barriers. It was all a bit makeshift, but that's really come on. On the right is it's not a streetery. It's one of our low traffic neighbourhoods, which is in trial at the moment. Camden Square and Murray Street, and I wish I had a photo, but we have a high street there, Murray Street, which is actually one of those high streets that's lost so many units over the years to residential conversion. But there is one cafe left, and we've placed a streetery outside the cafe, and just that on its own has really brought Murray Street to light and makes it look a bit more like the high street it once was within the low traffic neighbourhood, and is part of hopefully building support for the LTN when it comes to consultation. Other tools that we have at our disposal, which we've really come on with, are parklets and pocket parks. So the one on the left is a pocket park, which is part of the West End project, which I'll come on to in a minute. And on the right is a parklet, which we introduced on England's Lane in Belsize Park, which is a really great local high street, and it's a very nice looking parklet. It's supported by a local business, made from recycled wood, has cycle parking, seating, even has a spot for there's a dog bowl down there as well. So it's real full of attractors for people to come and enjoy their time there. I'm going to just say very briefly about the different types of high streets and the sorts of things we've done on there. I put Warren Street in the wrong place, so I'll just start with Warren Street. We actually reclaimed some of the space you can see in the middle where the bollard is and the seating. We actually did that quite a while ago, about 7 or 8 years, under an experimental traffic order initially to stop the traffic coming through, which kind of goes to show that the tools were always there. We just weren't always making as much use of them as we can. And this has been quite an incremental scheme, really. You can see there's actually still quite a bit more we could do. We've reclaimed the space, the seating, there's some quite attractive planters there. but one street's a candidate for going further in the future with a more transformational scheme. But it's just an example of what you can do incrementally on smaller budgets. And sorry for the gross photo at the bottom left, but that's next to the street we're in. We had a horrible fly tipping problem. People would dump their stuff there, so we placed a parklet there as well. So you've got a much more pleasant location to visit there now. But it's a reminder that which I always try and think about how you can tackle lots of problems at the same time by changing your streets, and you can design out problems like this, and that basically doesn't happen anymore. And this is also the councillor where I'm the ward councillor, so I was very keen to get this resolved, and there was a solution to it. Also in my ward is Tottenham Court Road, the West End project. This was the biggest project we've ever done in Camden in terms of public realm, £35 million scheme supported by Transport for London and others. Tottenham Court Road and Gower Street were at the heart of it. But in terms of Tottenham Court Road, which was of course an important commercial centre, very different from some of the other streets I'm showing you today. It's right in the central activity zone, mostly known for particular sectors, furniture shops, particularly electronics, less so these days, as well as lots of office workers, cafes and restaurants. We were wanting to transform the road partly to get ready for Crossrail, because we were anticipating many more pedestrians coming through. But we really, again, with this project, it wasn't just a transport project. It was about creating a stronger sense of place, making Tottenham Court Road an attractive place to go to. It wasn't particularly before, because you had all the traffic racing up. It wasn't in any sense sort of beautiful public realm. On the top photo you can see what it looked like before. Got that much older sort of infrastructure, the traffic island. And on the bottom, this is just outside the Heels furniture store, which is one of our flagship stores, and exactly the sort of business we want to keep in the borough, and for which we think we need to be able to create a pleasant environment outside, so that people will go to Tottenham Court Road. I think that's a nice place to head for our shopping, for our weekend leisure activities. And now you can see outside Heels, it's much more pleasant. There's wider pavements, there's many more trees along the road as well. And Tottenham Court Road also now benefits from certain sections being restricted to buses and cycles only, which is a really important cause. So there's all sorts of things you can bring together. Another one within the West End project, being this is something I'm really keen on, is actually taking these transformational project and making sure that a local area's history and culture is also reflected as part of it. And we managed to do this. For example, on the left is a mural which faces onto Tottenham Court Road, just next to Good Street Station, which was originally put up on the side of a building in the 1980s, and it's very reflective of Fitzrovia's history and very sort of radical anti-development actually sense. And we restored that as part of the project. And at the top right again is a war memorial from the First World War, the Bloomsbury Rangers. So again, very, very locally embedded, and we restored that and presented that in a much better way. A real jewel at the heart of the West End project was turning this road, Alfred Place, into a park. It was just a very bare road before parking, not much else going on. And again, with TfL's help, we were able to fund turning that into a park, and it's a really amazing space. It's been going really well. It's been open for nearly a year. And will hopefully attract people to Tottenham Court Road as a high street. Just say quickly about Queen's Crescent. I don't know if anyone knows it. It's a neighbourhood centre between Kentish Town and Chalk Farm, but kind of because of where it is, it's just that bit too far from Kentish Town, Chalk Farm to get that many outside visitors. But it's a real heart and real neighbourhood centre. It's in a part of the borough. It's very deprived, very low car ownership. And for many years, we've been wanting to support Queen's Crescent, to get more visitors in, to transform how the street looks and introduce new materials and support those businesses. So again, working with the GLA this time and the Mayor's Good Growth Fund, we had the funding to trial a project which actually took traffic out completely from Queen's Crescent in terms of it was no longer a through route. Which created huge amounts of space, supported the market, which runs twice a week. We've introduced some kind of public art on the ground, as well as the planters. You can't quite see them, but there's parklets there to support the cafes and so on. that it was a tricky scheme to introduce with the businesses who were adamant that they relied on trade coming by motor vehicle, but we engaged throughout in the consultation. At the end, we made changes to respond to some of their requests. But we did also have an understanding through MasterCard data of how businesses in the area were doing, and actually they were doing pretty well, and actually I think a little bit better after the trial went in, and we were able to compare those data with a comparable high street nearby where we hadn't made any interventions, and Queen's Crescent was doing a bit better. So that's an example of a very local and really important street to us in Camden. Put up Kilburn High Road because, as well as the brilliant work led by our transport team and our transport officers who work with our economic development team, we have set up a high streets task force internally as well with planning and regeneration colleagues. That's the high streets challenge that's mentioned there. And we've been wanting to work at Kilburn High Road for years. We had a consultation ready to go in March 2020, which we then couldn't go ahead with because all of our usual funding was lost and resource was directed to the COVID schemes. But we're bringing this back now, and you may know Kilburn High Road. It's a very long, important corridor out of central London. You can see the photo on the top right shows just how congested it gets on the road. The pavements are narrow. It's very busy. A huge amount of commercial activity there. Who we really want to support, and it's shared between Camden Council and Brent Council. So the High Streets Challenge team have been doing a fantastic piece of work to really, again, bring together many strands. So it's not just about making changes on the street. So the bridge there, it's at Bronsby Station. We're working with Brent and with a local artist, Lynette Kamala, to paint a mural on the bridge, and we've been working with. She's been leading work with the local community to design the mural, and that's hopefully, if Network Rail allow us, will be making that bridge much more beautiful, and with the mural that's going to be a lot more, will be reflective of people's local interests and culture. We set up a community improvement district, working with Brent, and again bringing together local community groups, residents, to talk about Kilburn and what they would like from the area and what we can deliver through this scheme or related schemes. And I just put a screenshot on the bottom right of a tweet from one of our local councillors, Eddie Hansen, who just this week was at one of the events at the Kiln Theatre, formerly the Tricycle Theatre, to talk about this. And there are so many more conversations happening for Kilburn now, which simply weren't before. Other things that we're kind of drawing in are, I've put the bottom left, that there's a library of things, which is a reuse library, which we've just opened. We opened one last year in Kentish Town in support of our wider recycling and reuse and circular economy work. And we thought Kilburn would be the right place to put a new library of things to show our commitment to Kilburn. Also in Kilburn Library is going to go a Changing Places bathroom facility, which we won funding for 5 or 6 across Camden to really open up high streets for people with severe disabilities. There's also going to be one going in on Queen's Crescent. And we've had an older people's group in Kilburn who for years have said we've never been able to have these conversations about getting these changes in. And this whole transformational piece of work, the whole piece of work happening around Kilburn is really allowing these things to finally move forward after many years. Haverstock Hill, I just put that on. That's Belsize Park, essentially. If you know Belsize Park, lots of lovely shops and cafes and restaurants there, and that's a safe and healthy street scheme similar to what we've done elsewhere in the borough. So we've brought in cycle lanes to connect town centres from Chalk Farm. Actually, the top right photo is actually Chalk Farm, where we introduced cycle lanes and new pedestrian crossings during COVID. That was one part of the link, and we wanted to build up the next part of the link up to Belsize Park to allow people to make those onward journeys and to travel more easily between high streets. And in Belsize Park, again, it's not just about the cycle lanes. Those are important, especially because we, studies show that people are more likely to travel to the shops if they're able to access them by bike, and to spend more in the shops and to spend more time there. But Haverstock Hill really lacked any good pedestrian crossings. They were very, very few and far between. It was not a situation was really acceptable in the 2020s in terms of promoting active travel and people's mobility. So as well as the cycle lanes, we brought in 5 new pedestrian crossings which link both sides of the high street and allow people to travel around much more easily. Those were largely the high streets I wanted to talk about. Just to flag, there's so many tools that we have at our disposal now, which we're able to draw on and add into the different schemes, whether it's footway widening, which we've been doing outside schools and other places, continuous crossings at side roads, which we pedestrians don't have to go up and down. It really improves accessibility for people, cycle hangers, and so on. Building out some of these very wide junctions that you see in lots of places, which are again completely inaccessible for pedestrians, and encourage faster motor speeds as well, making places not safe. Lots of new street trees. We found some of our own funding to raise the number of trees we plant every year to 600 a year. And one kind of future thing that's coming, which I can't quite show you yet because we haven't put it in place yet, but you see the dockless bike and e-scooter hire. We are part of the e-scooter trial in Camden. We're going to trial mobility hubs where you bring together electric vehicle charging points, e-scooters, bikes, and to make kind of focal points that people know where they are. They can easily access some form of onward travel, and really build those out as part of the urban landscape and people's forms of mobility that they'll be using in the future. So we're going to be trialing that in the Somerstown area, which is between Euston and King's Cross, and placing lots of those course on high streets and encouraging people to travel there and to make those journeys. I think that was largely it. Camden's pretty high on the Healthy Street scorecard, which I'd just like to tell you about. We're over there on the 4th and hoping to go even further in the future. That's it. Thank you.
One question. Yeah. Can I start with the chair's property of asking not one but 2 questions? The first is, you rolled out so many streeteries, presumably as many as the whole of the rest of London, possibly as many as the whole of the rest of the UK. How have you managed to do it? And secondly, we'd love to hear more. I'd love to hear more about the Murray Street Parkhead Streetery, which may be the salvation of this little patch of shops. And you see so many of these areas that's neglected and turned into housing. And hear more about that, and maybe how you're monitoring it and seeing whether it's a success.
Thanks. In terms of the streeties, we have about 20 in place across the borough, and nearly all of them do take away car parking outside cafes and restaurants. And I think it's just a question really of having the internal resource to be able to administer those. You have to go through the usual, I think, quite onerous consultation processes of consulting on losing a parking space and what you do with it, and then the traffic management order potentially on top of that as well. So part of it's political priorities, part of it actually is also having, I think, in-house expertise with your officers who are familiar with how to do this. And I see funding being made available, for example, recently by Active Travel England, which seems to be directed at increasing those in-house skills, and so I think that's important. So we're just very fortunate in Camden to have some of those skills and expertise available. And like I say, supporting those businesses was always rooted in our policy. So there was a real imperative for that. On Murray Street, I don't know if it will rescue the whole high street. So I think so many of those units are gone, but I suppose it may forestall any further losses, and it does just provide a sense of focus. It's a focal point on the street, and provide some life there as well. And we have, with the England's Lane Parklet, the people who manage it, the cafe next door, they've been surveying how much time people spend on the park. I think it's about 8 minutes overall. People stop for a coffee, or they stop on their way to other places as well. So it really does just provide the opportunity for people to use the space as they wish.
Thanks. So, and we have various researchers and academics in the audience, so this seems to me like a very fruitful area for research as to just how effective they are and how much they increase footfall. Other questions, please, sir.
It's great to hear a politician actually presenting about urban design and enthusiasm as well. And it would be really good to see how we get access to some of the research and the sort of information that would actually help us in other parts of the country. On my office down in Dorset, so we're quite a way away, we talk to local politicians who really struggle with taking any traffic away from business on street space. Although we work across the country, generally outside of London, we find it really difficult. If you could, if there's a way of actually connecting some of those politicians combined to yourself, and it also explains now, seeing on the slide of one of the urban designers on our office, Laura, every time she comes to London, she always cycles around Camden, and she always comes back really excited. So she's spending money there. So you're getting someone from Braun. So, but I think you could get access to some of that research, and also whether you meet any politicians that are very, very scalable or very skeptical of this sort of work, you really have to use it elsewhere.
So that the people online in terms of hear the question, so that they can't then hear the audience. Would you mind very quickly repeating the question? And David, when you're speaking, could you get close to that microphone?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. So the question was about whether politicians or local councillors are kind of up for the challenge of making some of these changes, and what councillors who've been through this can do to support them, and also what research is available and what studies are available to help build those cases. I think it's a really important point. I think there's probably a job of work from people like me to do, and others to use the councillor networks. And so within the local government association, with some of the political groups within those, to kind of foster that understanding. And we've probably not done quite as much of that yet. I mean, in all honesty, it's quite easy to go into, although it's part and parcel of what you do, streets work is part and parcel of what you do as a council. It's quite easy to go into the role without actually knowing much about this, and I certainly didn't. I've been a councillor for a while now, but one of the things I always remember is that there was a resident actually on Tottenham Court Road who introduced me to Jan Gale, and I learned so much talking to her, and really it really opened my eyes and actually fed into kind of my support for that scheme and others. And I'm by no means an expert. I'm very much a generalist, as I think most politicians should be. But we do need to make sure that they have those opportunities. It's not just because they happen to have a resident who's able to teach them these things. And then in terms of all the studies and data, we very happy to share that with anyone who asks. A lot of it's available. I think with our transport strategy, there's huge evidence base that's appended to it, so there'll be useful information in there. And then again, with any of our decision reports or much else that's online, there's a big treasure trove in there.
So, can you say who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
This is the question about engaging communities.
Yeah, how do we best do that? It's a sort of obvious thing to say. It is really important to engage your communities and understand what they want and need. And you also have to strike the balance between moving at pace and delivering, quickly, because we haven't particularly talked about some of the wider environmental challenges with air pollution and climate, but we do need to make such changes in order to address those and move fairly quickly. But there are ways to do these. So with most of our schemes now, we will be doing early engagements, co-design. The Queen's Crescent project, which I mentioned earlier, actually there have been many rounds of engagement and design there over many years, but to the extent that people were actually a bit frustrated that we hadn't made change more quickly. But I think the upshot of that was that we did have a strong sense that there was an appetite in that local community for change. So although there was resistance, as I mentioned, on the part of some of the businesses, because by that point we'd gone back to the older the method of consulting at the beginning and then consulting at the end, unlike the COVID emergency measures. When we first consulted, it was 50-50 whether people wanted to trial it, but 50-50 was good, and then which confirmed our sense that there was an appetite for change, and probably some of the work, the engagement work, could probably help facilitate that and get people's imaginations going. And then by the end of that trial, support rose to 60%. So the trialing actually made that difference as well.
Robert.
There's a question from Ruth Merz. Not everyone that has such positive customers, your officers, is kind of embarrassed. Despite that, in front of the funding, how do the councils with outside leaders get this going for their residents?
That's a good question. I've always, I remember being asked something very similar at another conference a few years ago, and I'm not sure I gave a great answer then either. I think my best advice would be to start with, there's always somewhere in your borough where there'll be people who want the through traffic reduced or removed, or there'll be some streets issue. So I would start with where you can do work, where there is local community support, and just do what you can. And then once you do start to make changes, in my experience, other people then start saying, well, can I have the same? Streets changes are very visible. They get noticed very quickly, and especially in these days of next door and much more social media and communication within neighbourhoods. I think if you can start to deliver somewhere, then that can make a difference.
I think we have time for one final question. More? Well, thank you very much, Ella. That was great.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Yes.
And our next speaker is Chris Martin, who is active in the Urban Design Group, a co-founder of Urban Movement, a member of the United Nations Action Panel on Climate Change, and every possible accolade you can imagine. And he has the tantalising subject of a Kitemark for street quality. Yes, brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Make a slight adjustment to the rostrum.
All good. Thanks very much. Good to see you all today, here in person and online. I think when we think about creating better streets, we have a problem in a way, in that everyone in the room, understandably and immediately, starts thinking about this scale, the street, when a more relevant scale to start from would be the neighborhood. A more relevant than that, maybe the city, and then of course, even more relevant again would be the planet. And this is because investment in improving streets delivers benefits far outside the street itself. It delivers benefits, or can deliver benefits, to climate, to biodiversity, to air quality, quality of life, to the urban heat island effect, to community cohesion, economic prosperity, and transport poverty, and of course down to road safety at the scale of the street as well. Now, in the third quarter of 2022, the overall vacancy rate in UK high streets was 14%. And we know that better streets, as the council just outlined, make better places to spend time and money. The summer of 2022 entered the climate record books as the first time the UK hit an air temperature above 40 degrees. And you'll no doubt remember that wasn't just in the day as well, with the highest minimum temperature as well. And taking a walk in the summer along a street last year was quite unbearable at certain times. But we know that better streets mitigate urban heat. In the last quarter of 2022, 86% of UK adults said they were concerned about day-to-day living costs, and over half, 54%, said they were very concerned. But in 2022, the average cost of owning a car was £3,500 a year in the UK, or nearly £6,000 for those on finance. And despite this, our streets and neighbourhoods on the whole require people to drive to access opportunity, to access leisure and essential services. Better streets enable people to move about in more cost-effective ways, alleviating transport poverty. And all this when we know that the average European car is parked 92% of the time, and every man, woman and child, whether you choose to drive or not saying children should drive, is subsidising car use to the sum of £800 a year in the UK. We are in an affordability crisis, and this is all whilst being in, we know, a climate crisis, an obesity crisis, a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis, and a loneliness crisis. We're at a very different junction, you might say, and because of this, we need to ensure that we use our available resources to tackle these crises in the most cost-effective and efficient ways. We need interventions by political leaders to target the areas that yield the most benefit for the most people. How we shape cities simply has to be governed by what yields the maximum return on investment for people in society with the space we've got available. And investment in our public realm and in our streets especially, I think is really uniquely placed to target an enormously broad set of issues. Investments in streets can and must help us better mitigate surface water, seeing water as a potential asset rather than an inconvenience to bury and hide away. We need investment in streets to target the urban heat island effect, to make cities and urban areas better places to live, which will only become more and more important. Streets need to continue to be the democratic heart of communities and neighborhoods. The places we've created as human beings to live in aren't really that good for our mental health. 55% of Londoners have reported feeling lonely often, and in other UK cities, 15% of people say they feel they have absolutely nobody to rely on. But we know how streets can address this. Appleyard highlighted it in the 60s, the increased social connections we have when our residential streets especially aren't dominated by through traffic and aren't a barrier. We need investments in our streets to enable active travel. There's far too many reasons to talk about this right now, but one is because inactivity is killing over 5 million people every year globally and ruining many more lives. And obviously connected to transport poverty, another reason is that around 20% of people in the UK have no access to a car. So we need investment in streets to yield economic benefits for our neighbourhoods and high streets. And we know when more space is given over to people for spending time walking and inevitably less to cars, the absence of customers arriving by car is more than compensated by people arriving on foot or by bike if we get the design right. Living Streets Pedestrian Pound has numerous case studies around this. San Francisco, where the first trial parklet was introduced, increased pedestrian traffic in the area by 37% and increased people walking at the weekend by nearly 400%. And a similar scheme in London increased takings in the adjacent shop by 20%. Now, this term climate urbanism describes the way in which we think and act in urban areas under climate change. So we're all engaged in climate urbanism in this room. For years, we've been talking about urban resilience. Resilience it really describes the ability to survive under conditions of risk and uncertainty, to fight, to build higher and higher, and to defend, as we see in the picture there. And many cities are trying to be more resilient. But do we want to only carry on surviving under risk and uncertainty? I think another way to look at it is to move beyond protecting from and resisting into creating more equity, into climate repair, and creating better quality of life. Climate justice is the link between the climate changes and social, civil, and human equity. And in this, streets, I think, are on the front line of delivering climate justice, repairing our relationship with the environment and improving our quality of life. So looking forward, we need to view our streets as the valuable assets that they are, to move away from nostalgic or learned behaviors and views of what streets are or should be, and ensure that streets are delivering a public good at the very least. And we cannot see this public good as a cost to be negotiated away once planning permission has been obtained or concept design supported. It should be the benchmark that all new developments and streetscape projects should meet. And the fantastic housing design audit for England from the Place Alliance gave us a slice through what we're delivering in terms of new neighbourhoods and communities in England. And delivering new communities and neighbourhoods, it clearly has the ability to alleviate housing pressures, which we were all acutely aware of. But how we bring them to pass is incredibly important. And this gives us the opportunity to hardwire in new ways of thinking and living, and the opportunity to create places that deliver quality of life and access to opportunity for all, or not, depending on how we do them. And the opportunity really to create modern and climate just equitable development that delivers public good. However, the audit for England clearly concluded that the neighbourhoods we are creating are consistently poor or pervasively problematic, as they diplomatically put it. And the areas where development seems to consistently fall short of delivering a public good are all connected to the way we conceive of and design streets. Highways design, storage and bins, public open and play space, development character, car parking, these are all consistently reported to be poor. And connectivity, street definition, legibility, public transport, pedestrian and cycle friendliness, all being reported as being of varied success, but all marked as challenging. With so much riding on getting streets right, I think there's a need for a publicly recognizable scheme that makes people immediately aware that proposals, neighborhood developments especially, but also streetscape projects will be good for them and deliver a public good. The process will look at a variety of scales, from the inherent walkability of a proposal through to the detail, in order to make an assessment. So is the proposed development at Disneyland a wonderfully delightful and magical place to walk around when you get there, but getting there requires a car, helicopter, or heroism? Is the street enabling the conviviality principle? So urban neighborhoods in cities are inherently sociable places. They're born out of our willingness to come together with loads of other people and explore the endless possibilities that gives us. So streets need to enable this conviviality through design and layout to create strong communities and deliver better mental health outcomes. Does the street feel right? That sounds incredibly woolly, but there are obviously metrics to attach to it. Is the street full of interest and intrigue? Does it make you want to explore? What is the street doing to respond to the climate and the changing climate? And how is the street benefiting the microclimate of the neighborhood? What's bounding the street? Is it exciting and lively? Does what's bounding the street make it safe to be out on the street at different times of the day, despite your gender or what time of the day you're there? Is there a consistent frontage that is tight, changing often to keep us interested? Are the streets drab, or are they lush and engaging, full of green and playful elements and seductive setbacks and stoops? Is parking being used to support place rather than allowing parking to dominate the experience of place? So we need to move away from the idea that plentiful and low-cost parking at our doorstep is a key component to economic success and quality of life, because all the research points to that. And what is the movement and place balance of the street we're looking at? Are we creating a people place through which necessary vehicles are invited, or are we designing for movement and giving people what's left over? I think design speed is hugely important. Getting to more detail, is the design speed one that supports place or enables efficient movement through? Rather than cluttering the environment with lining, signing objects aimed at the motorist, is the street designed for low speeds through people-friendly interventions? And are we insisting on layouts that have inherent design speeds that make walking and cycling place pleasant and safe? This fantastic publication you should all read is a street designed for the worst case scenario. The once weekly bin lorry, the articulated lorry that might turn down the street at exactly the same time as another articulated lorry, well, never going to happen, or is a street designed for the everyday activity in life whilst accommodating everything that needs to happen, but sensibly? And does the street give people, looking at really down in the detail now, does the street give people a variety of places to sit, where and when they might need to sit? Are streets comfortable for fun and games, for play? And is the neighborhood making play, movement, and exercise an excuse rather than a chore? And the point where people are made to meet their neighbors in vehicles, the sort of crossing of the street, this is the point when the diversity of transport we all enjoy, it really poses a threat. So how is the crossing positioned? What type of crossing are we using? Who has priority? How frequent are the crossings? How much delay are you causing a pedestrian when they get to that crossing? Zebra crossing 0, push button, how many seconds? And how much do people have to deviate off their desire line to use that crossing? All these detailed elements are hugely impactful to the way people use streets and whether people use streets at all. And what else is the street doing to defend walkability? If we're going to create streets that meet the needs of our diverse people, different desires, different attitudes, we need to enable people to cross the street with more spontaneity and convenience, as well as offering formal crossings. So things like central medians, continuous crossings, side road zebras in the future, we hope. What is the street doing to shift the balance of how pedestrians engage with the place, and especially how people coexist with vehicles? And of course, are the footways and pavements we're providing clear of obstacles and delivering accessibility justice? So I'm thinking this recognizable scheme is what we need to really release the energy of the private sector to put value in the service of values, by really aligning society and community behind a common view, ambition, and outcome of what streets need to be. And doing this, we can really make it profitable to be part of the solution and costly to be part of the problem, especially in terms of developments. Thank you very much.
Should we have some questions? Well, I have a question, Chris. This looks a great idea. How does it relate to the Lucy Saunders TfL Healthy Streets Circle that you showed at the beginning?
I think the biggest difference is one's internal and one's externally facing. I think what I'm thinking of is very much a publicly facing sort of marker, really, in that I used the sort of buy lion eggs example at the beginning, which is kind of instantly recognizable to the public as something which is of good quality and is healthy for them. And I think it's exactly that kind of difference, in that the Healthy Streets toolkit and audit and check is an incredibly valuable tool, especially for designers, in terms of comparing schemes and building up their design thinking, but actually, as of yet, hasn't managed to make a huge impact on what consumer demand is driving. And I think that becomes especially relevant to new development, when we see that most of the volume house builders are saying that actually the biggest thing people demand is 2 car parking spaces outside their front door. And that's because there's no other way of getting around. Whereas that thinking that consumer demand doesn't exist on the continent, because consumer demand is asking for something else, and they would never dream of building that. But I think it's definitely the sort of consumer facing, again, a little bit like the hygiene rating you see at restaurants. It's very much a consumer facing idea. Thank you.
Tom.
Thank you. Tom Cohn, University of Westminster. Sounds like this needs an arbiter in order for it to have its success. And well, the name Active Travel England springs to mind, but are they the right people to enforce, if that's the right word, something of this sort?
Whether yeah, I'm not sure it's in force, but it could be. I wouldn't put any words in anyone's mouth. So living streets would be a comfortable home, sort of bastions of walking quality and design quality when it comes to active travel. I think those are the organisations that where it would have a nice home.
Suzanne.
Suzanne from the Department. I had a meeting this morning with the council for there's a cafe in Cllr place which wants to have a carpet, because there's a row of shops which suffered since LTN. But we all know the argument that the shops always like, oh no, you're ridiculous, and bad thing, restaurants. So what can we say to them? They're become the
So in terms of when a parklet hasn't worked, is that what?
No. But they only close the street.
So I think the question is what can residents do and campaigners to help cafe owners get parklets, especially when there are new LTNs. And in this case, I think that this person was very opposed to the LTN, but now wants to see if they can make it work by making an attractive destination. So any advice? Well,
I think making it an attractive destination is essential. I think often if you look at the sort of effort that Summer Streets is involved in, things like Summer Streets in central London, when they close the streets, they don't just close the street and say, hey, enjoy. You know, there's often a lot to it, and a lot of community programming and organisation. I think that has to happen as well, especially in the early days, to really show people what those changes can make. Because obviously, if you were to dream up a permanent scheme of a closed street with no vehicles, you wouldn't draw it as a blank canvas. So I think it's about putting a lot of effort in at the beginning to really support what the differences could be to people. And I think maybe to lean on our last speaker as well, it's getting the support of like-minded councillors and people who know the benefits that can happen and building on that resource.
And I think, sorry if I can intervene, I think as Adam said, also having officers who will do these things. We have a question online.
Question online. Katie Fowler, how do retail development in suburban areas when there is a greater reliance on the streets? So it's suburban style development, suburban style retail development that's connected. How can the streets there be made healthier?
I suppose the first thing would be to question the location of the suburban greenfield development. I suppose inherently it might be the wrong place for development. And then I think the second point is even a development in the wrong place can have healthy streets in terms of how they're designed and better streets for it comes down to car parking and where that car parking is located. Car parking could be collated on the periphery in parking houses and minimize on-street parking or eliminate on-plot parking. And that gives you the ability to create a much healthier environment and streetscape within the development. But of course, the main thing is, in terms of strategic urban design, is getting the development in the right place to start with.
And do we know if any of the volume house builders are starting to think in this way? Do we find that the Barclays are starting to put in, I think you showed Moraine Road up there, which was sort of Clay Street. Are these starting to be incorporated into volume house builders?
I think they're starting to be incorporated much more in urban regeneration projects by councils than they are by volume house builders, merely in terms of what I've seen. But I think in terms of the point of an idea like this would be to actually change consumer demand, at which point then the volume house builders would respond to that. I think the volume house builders would only respond to what they can sell fairly.
And of course, it's consumer demand that's driven these sort of pedestrian places like the Argent development of King's Cross.
Hugely, yeah.
Martin.
There's consumer demand and there's investor demand. Assuming you can get a decent arbiter for to enforce or some kind of standard in Kitemark, could you go down the ESG as a way of getting investment? Because we're currently looking at for the suburban development, transport activity metrics. So if you take on board by the ESG that i.e., if you build a sustainable location, demonstrate that your development generates less carbon, like nothing but claim that, or vice versa. Try and get those.
I mean, summarize the question.
I'll try. It's about sort of leveraging ESG investment as part of these developments. I think it's probably the surmise of it. I'm not an expert in the funding models of housing developments. I think the sort of a clearer metric for me is just in terms of where these projects have been delivered, what has the effect been on values, and even harking back to the days of the Transport for London's Valuing Urban Realm toolkit, which is still a really important and useful tool in terms of people's propensity to pay for public realm and streetscape improvements, making them better for spending time in active travel. And actually people's propensity to pay is very high, which would allude to the fact that there is a market for these things. And I think ESG would be the complete other side of it, and even adding more support, I can imagine. But yeah, we should see.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Emma Griffin, who is Vice Chair of London Living Streets and the co-founder of Footways. And I think many maps are circulating around the room. I don't know whether there are any more to hand out. There are a pile there if anybody wants them. And Emma will talk about the work she's been doing in Hackney, producing a great mapping of Hackney walking routes and their role in regeneration and linkages. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. I hope you've all got a map there. I will let's see if we go. Here we go. Yeah, so I'm one of the co-founders of Footways, as David says, and just in case you don't know about the project, we started in central London, and the idea started simply, is to connect destinations with quiet, enjoyable, interesting, enticing streets, low pollution, low traffic, primarily. Connect destinations so people enjoy their walks and thereby walk further on their everyday journeys and also their leisure journeys, of course. And we use this as a tool for infrastructure improvements, so a way to kind of feed ideas back to councils where changes can be made, and also as a tool for engagement. And I think the Hackney project really has moved the project on in kind of new avenues, which we'll talk about. And I guess really today, I guess there's a call for, when we're talking about better streets, that we don't just look at individual streets or high streets or town centres, but we take a wider view to look at a whole area, both in terms of transport and how that connects with people on foot, but also in terms of what that street actually is for and how we use it. And it's not just about consumption and footfall and spending money, but that street's wider uses and its wider connections to the whole community. So the Hackney Central project launched last week, which was fantastic. And we had a great event in Hackney Central with the mayor and the cabinet lead for transport, Adam's Griffin, talking with lots of local historians. And this was actually a council funded project, part of a regeneration kind of pot of money for Hackney Central. And thankfully that pot of money did take this broad look, and it was looking not just at boosting numbers of people visiting Hackney Central, trying to kind of balance out that kind of regeneration that's seen in other areas, not just the boring markets, but the kind of narrow ways, getting more people visiting. But they were also looking at wider kind of improvements such as sustainability and well-being and local character. So we did two elements of that project. We, as in central London, we created a walking network, and we did that over a number of years, actually working with local campaigners and so forth. But we also then developed a map of features that people can explore online, and we did this by going out and talking to the local communities. And this was really the major part of this work. We weren't just kind of doing all the research ourselves, but going to all sorts of community groups, older people groups, some women's groups, walking the street. I think there's a picture there of me eating a nice paella as I was doing some research. It's a tough life, and talking to local people about their history. And it turned to be an incredibly fruitful process. I think if you go to there's an amazing group called the Sharp End, and they meet in the Cat and Mutton pub, if anyone knows it, on the Way Market on a Wednesday afternoon once a month. And if you bring up the conversation that tell me about the area that you've lived in for decades, what was there in the past, tell me about what was on the street, the conversation gets going, and you're there for a very, very long time hearing incredible stories. And that material has filled our map, and we have got incredibly rich and detailed material. So please go and look at our online version, which is great. So it was a really useful tool for community engagement for us, but both ways. And so I think, so yeah, go and check it out. So the map, there's our digital map, and we've created a digital map with all the features on. There are many more going to be put online there now. There are just so many, and the materials is still coming in. And we've also got the paper map that you've got in your hands now, and you can go and pick that up from Hackney Museum, or tell your contacts and your friends to go and do so. And we'll be launching, and we'll be letting people know about new places where they can go and pick up maps soon. I'm going to come back to a few of the things that came out of that project in a minute. But also I want to talk about another project we've been working on that's launching hopefully this week or next week with Islington Council. Again, this was for the Caledonian Road. They wanted to do a project to, again, boost footfall visitors, I guess, to the Caledonian Road, boost the businesses on that street. Luckily, they were willing to take this wider approach, and we worked with them to develop some walking routes to take people to the Caledonian Road for more major transport interchanges. From the new development, massively rich development just south at King's Cross, from Camden, and from all the major transport hubs, and all the kind of more successful, if that's the right word, streets like the Angel, but also from the local housing estates and all the local areas. And this has been a really interesting project in the sense that this mapping process has linked the street with its local area and its local culture and its history. It's placed it, as part of that kind of the history of the area as being kind of between next to the railway lines from Victorian times, the canals, huge industrial sites, the cattle market was on the Caledonian Road for a long time, one of the largest cattle markets I think London's ever seen off the Caledonian Road, linking again on the other side with the kind of rich developments of Barnsbury. We're kind of placing the street in its local context properly by doing this in-depth research, and go and check out that map. It's got all the kind of businesses. We've got a lot of material in from the local businesses about what's going on there. And this stuff hasn't really been talked about. There's a huge amount of material writing about, the Angel or King's Cross. You can get any amount, but the Caledonian Road itself there's been very little. And we've discovered this amazing array of international cuisine going on there that really isn't talked about. Very few restaurant reviews are being written about these incredible restaurants. and also incredible bits of it in history. So go and check that map out as well. Now, I guess there were two issues that came out of this research that I'd like to talk to. One of the I'll go back to the picture here, where this is the group here. They're called Xenia, and they are a group of women that come together once a week in Hackney. And some of these women are refugees and newcomers to Hackney. Some are residents and lived in the area a long time. Some speak no English and come along to learn English, and others are long-standing, and speak English fluently and help in that kind of language learning process. It's an incredible group of women, an incredibly rich conversation, really good fun. And we had one of the meetings here about walking, and we talked about all their walking journeys. And one of the things that came out of that was, not anyone in the room drove anywhere. They were all walkers. That was their main form of transport for at least some part of their journey, usually for the short part of the journey after a bus ride or a train ride. But walking was one of the one form of transport that they all shared. But the other thing that came out of that, which I just found so alarming, was fear about safety walking on streets. I mean, I don't feel so. I feel fairly safe walking around Hackney, so I've maybe had become near to this, but certainly talking to women that were new to the area, and especially younger women, that feeling of safety was a shock. And then going back to the evidence, it shows that this is common and this is widespread. I mean, shocking statistics here that 71% women experiencing sexual harassment. And I mean, this one, I think Robert pointed this incredible stat out to me, and thanks for pointing this out. This was a YouGov study that 20% of the people in the survey actually didn't ever walk at night, which is basically saying 1 in 5 women are not going out at night, possibly for reasons of safety. This is an effective curfew on women. So this is a human rights crisis, and it needs to be dealt with. And of course, in this room, and as Chris brilliantly showed in his last presentation, how urban design has an incredible role in this, in creating safe by design, and there's clear lines of sight and visibility and lighting and wide pavements, but also all those convivial tools that we need to make places feel welcome, and places where you can stop and chat and feel the eyes on the streets, as Jane Jacobs pointed out so well, and feel that and feel the kind of just the safety of other people. So women's safety, I think, needs to be a priority, and I'm hoping that can be continued in this seminar series and hopefully by your work. There was also a kind of role for apps, and there's quite a lot of apps coming out for women's safety. And I personally have a little bit of a concern about some of these apps that are informing women of places that are unsafe, warning them of safety issues on streets. I feel, and I'm ready to be challenged on this, that kind of tells us that streets are less safe, and actually makes me feel more wary of them. So I would prefer to see much more positive acts to boost this, and positive apps and tools and things and activities that can help our safety, that complement obviously all the design. I had a walk with a researcher this week called Cllr, and she's at the University of East London, and she was hoping to do a project coming up soon, doing guided tours for women at night, taking women out at night and doing, doing stories or sharing stories, or guided tours that kind of combat the kind of Jack the Ripper side of things, about how treacherous streets are, and actually talk about streets and stories of the night, to actually open that up to women and make them feel safe. And these are not the only solutions, but these are all part of the tools that kind of change our mindsets on this. And of course, I'm going to say our map's one of these tools. And I think just by showing people the routes and showing people what the streets there and how to use them does have an impact. I know from all the meetings that we did with the various groups, each and every time people said, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to walk home. And so I think they do have effect. They just change how we think. So let's hope that we can see a variety of tools for kind of just shifting mindsets as much as physically creating safe spaces. And the other one, I'll go for this slide first, was I guess creating trying to make sure that our streets are balanced for all uses and all people feel connected to those spaces. And I know this is stuff that you're all thinking, I'm sure everyone in this room thinks about a lot, but I want to just use an example from one of the workshops we did. Not a workshop, I went to a meeting actually with a residents association of a group that live just behind Broadway Market. This is Broadway Market in E8, just south of London Fields. They use a flat and a tower block just behind Broadway Market to have their meetings. And I went and had a mince pie with them just before Christmas to chat about kind of their local history. That group told me in extreme detail the makeup of Broadway Market in the 1950s. It was incredible. Every single shop, one by one, and how they used it, the names of the shopkeepers, what they bought here, what was going on there, all the gossip, everything. It was incredible, this detail. And what came out of those conversations was just how beautifully mixed that street was and how it was performing so many services and so many roles for everyone. It was a proper functioning high street. I'm sure how Broadway Market now has been covered by endless amounts of studies. It's become an area for consumption, and the market that was brought in did revive the street, and no one was using it in the 1970s and 80s. It was completely into disrepair and no one was there. So it did revive it in one sense, but maybe it's become a victim of its own success. I was there last week. I couldn't actually do it's my local street as well. I couldn't actually do my food shopping because it just simply was so busy with consumption of just eating there on the street and walking up performance space. So, and this reminded me actually of a dissertation. Actually, it was Will Bradley, who works at the GLA now, and he did the same master's as me, I think about 12 years ago. And it reminded me of the dissertation he wrote back then. And I think what's happened in the 12 years since has gone even further. And I found this an article here. Sundays at Broadway Market, as the vibe is dressed down, but with Prada. It very much is about consumption. This feeling that the area now doesn't feel as connected as it was connected to its local history as such. It is much more about performance and about consuming, and not about actually just a general role of what a street is. So again, solving this doesn't come down to a map. And I'm not going to even suggest that there are huge planning policies and everything that has to go in to fix these problems. But I think there is a role for different tools to be connecting people with the places that they're using and showing kind of versions of it in the past and showing how it's been used and how it is now. And I think our mapping tool has got a role in this. One of the activities that came out of that meeting with that residents group is that they're going to set up their own guided walk this spring. And everyone from that group is going to take a section of it. They're going to walk down from Cllr Road all the way up to Broadway Market, and they're going to talk about their local histories on the way. They felt by talking about their local history, they wanted to do this. They wanted to invite as many people as long as possible, so people could hear these stories and share it, and we could get a different version of the history of the market out there. When one of the welcoming outcomes of our mapping work in Hackney has been that the ideas that people have been sending us of features to put on the map. I was worried at one point they would be local businesses talking about what they're selling and what they're doing and where to get your kind of nice bit of French cheese or a nice piece of falafel or whatever. But actually, the stories that people want to tell are ones of protest or are ones of I guess, conquests in terms of battles that have happened in Hackney. And some of the ones that have failed, people want to talk about infrastructure changes. And that's been a key part of this project, so that we can talk about the infrastructure changes that are being fought at the moment. Our launch event last week, we had a historian talking about the history of the Tesco car park in Hackney Central, which I recommend you all go and check out, which is really fascinating, how it's kind of, how it was started off as a place where it was actually for growing vegetables, and then almost got built upon for a massive motorway that was going to be built around London, and now again is going through another battle to potentially become flats and a kind of another high-end space. But these are the stories that people want to hear about. And I think we've got to find different ways to get these stories out. Mapping's one, guided walks are another, and all these different tools for creating different narratives. So please go and check out our map. You've got one there, go and look at it online. And if you want to develop a walking network and an interactive digital map where you live, please get in touch. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Emma. Well, that must have generated some questions.
James, Mr. O'Keefe. I just wondered, is your map going to result in investment in sort of waymarking and actual public development steps to support groups?
Yeah,
Just repeat the question.
so it's whether the mapping will go into funding infrastructure improvements and wayfinding, actual physical changes on the street. So we're a very small organisation, and that's our ultimate aim. Is what we want to do is influence infrastructure improvements. And when every project that we're doing, we're talking to the local council about what we think needs to improve along our networks to make them safer for people walking. And that's one of our creams, not something we're focused on today. And in wayfinding, definitely. I mean, our work in central London, one of our sort of main supporters on that work was Network Rail, and we're really hoping to be starting a piece of work with them soon on wayfinding from stations, and hopefully that could lead to something. But yeah, I mean, wayfinding is the next thing, and this needs to all be coordinated into a kind of on-street changes as well.
Is it right, Emma, that on the Camden work with the Camden Loop and Camden Town, we're actually mapping where local communities would like to see the infrastructure improvements made?
So we're doing a piece of work with Camden Town Limited. Thanks for the reminder, David. My co-founder reminding me of so we're doing a piece with Camden Town Limited. And yeah, that map, as we showed here, these maps have been on local culture and history. That map actually is on infrastructure improvements, and go and check that out. It's on our website. And yeah, there's all sorts of information that people have fed in to put onto the map about things that need to change. And we're doing this all the time on the back end as well, and feeding that back to councils.
Yeah, thank you. Really interesting presentation. Very natural as well. It's like just like flow. You didn't really sort of have to. One was maybe connect with the business community. Because in COVID, I had to force people to meet in person, so I can't stand the online stuff. And the only way I got some councils and some developers together was to actually do a walking meeting. We had a heap of space, but by the end of it, funny enough, we were very quite close and we were chatting away. And that seemed to work quite well, actually. We made quite a lot of decisions in half an hour, walking around an area, looking at sites and streets. Yeah. So I wondered whether there was an opportunity or whether you're doing that. And the second one was, have you got any pedestrians on the streets? Because one of the feedbacks we were getting a lot in a particular project we're looking at was we feel really unsafe pedestrians, believe it or not. Well, and young men too were saying that too. But yeah, it seems to be a real issue when we sort of completely take away any other mode of transport. But sometimes, pedestrianisation feels very unsafe.
Yeah, I'll come back to that second one in a minute. I've got too much to say about that. But the first one, yeah, you're right. Walking meetings, gosh, this is every meeting on a walk, and you could do it's incredibly productive. But in terms of engaging with the businesses for that Caledonian Road, it was very slow. It started off by email. Nothing was happening at all that way. So I just walked up and down the street talking to businesses, and that opened up all sorts of conversations. That was as simple as that. But you're right, getting people out and actually walking, looking at stuff. And I know, we've had great walks in Camden with your offices in Camden, which have been incredible, and they're so productive, just walking a few key routes and standing on a street corner for 20 minutes and just watching the traffic kind of hurtling past us and watching all the students. This was just south of Euston Station, not able to get across, really kind of illustrated that. So you're right, yeah, get out and walk as much as possible. I think that's a great idea. And the pedestrianised streets, it's so annoying, yeah. And there's all, I'd love to hear what Chris would say about that, about how you create that eyes on the street and make sure that they always people there. I'm always dismayed that Some women feel that they get more safety from a passing car than passing people, which does. But then this was came up in when we were working in Hackney. The mayor of Hackney said he'd heard these concerns with the low traffic neighbourhoods. Women weren't feeling as safe walking down low traffic neighbourhoods. So he was happy about this project because it would create more people walking down there. I just think on those pedestrian streets, if we can make them 24-hour and keep that activity going all the time and not just be about shopping, but be about all sorts of other activities, just placing people sitting on streets, I think sometimes is enough, because there's just that feeling that you actually do have the eyes and the surveillance. So surveillance is not the right word, but you know what I mean? But I think I'm really keen to do another event focusing on this alone, because I think there's so much more to come out of it.
But just to say, I'd love to walk down Dorchester High Street and see how you can get rid of the traffic there, which ruins a wonderful street. But Chris's office is next to the market, and that's a pedestrianised street that really is active almost all day and night. And the very fact there are so many people there, I think, makes it feel very safe. More questions?
It's kind of similar to do with the issues of safety in the street, but kind of do with air pollution, where we talk about the pedestrian pound and one of the key benefits of getting people to the shops on the high street. But if a high street or a street with shops on it, there's also a high pollution, high air pollution route. Would like if you're waiting on have duty to move away from that street, or that like it's pretty nice, but FYI street.
Yeah, actually, so when we published our first map, we did use some high streets, but we were very cagey about using high streets for that exact reason. We were like trying to do the low pollution, quieter streets. But then I think as we moved on, we realized that these high streets are where people need to be and want to be, because that's where the activity in the shops and all the things, the banks and all the services that they need to access are. So we need to direct people down there. So, and also it links into this idea that we can't just be, we need to be improving high streets as well. So therefore it kind of creates an impetus for that. We used to colour our routes differently according to high streets and back streets, but on this current map, they're all the same colour. So I think maybe my answer to that is maybe we just need to do more to make the high streets as low pollution, and there are all sorts of different tools that can be done to do that. And I don't think we can be taking people away from that. These are all part of our street network and places where people need to be. I don't know if that answered that at all, really. Yeah. Yeah, we've not thought about terrain yet. I think, yeah, that's true. We haven't got to Highgate yet. That's the biggest hill we've got is probably Pentonville Road. I don't know. Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know. We'd have to look at a way that would make that clear that there is a terrain involved. Yeah. Are you from that area? Oh, well, let's chat there. I think, yeah. Let's chat after. Yeah, I think there must be, yeah. I think hills are good. I grew up on a hill. I think, you know.
Do that signage. Have you put that point through the definitions in that to create props? But some places they don't 10 or 15 minutes away by walking.
Yeah, we need to do more of that, and we've not done it yet. We need some more funding, and then we can get going on that. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think this all needs to be complemented with on-street and paper. Our map is one tiny tool for this. We are not solving everything with one digital paper map. Ours is as much a kind of tool for at home to kind of thinking and changing how you think about space and how close things are. And you can use it as a wayfinding thing when you're on the street, but we need to complement that with tools on the street. And we're talking to lots of people about that all the time and looking for ideas. I'm really hoping we can get a pilot set up with Network Rail soon at Euston Station to look at some things that we could do there and try different kind of tactics about how to kind of change that kind of decision when they leave Euston Station to walk instead of jump on the tube, or heaven forbid in a taxi.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just to add on that point, it'd be very nice to have as large a sign saying Bloomsbury or British Museum in that direction for walking, as just have a present that says taxis. But I'm delighted that now Tanya Braun, as Director of Policy and Communications at Living Streets, is going to talk more about engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Hi, yeah, it's great to be here at a summit talking about better streets. At Living Streets, we're obviously big advocates of better streets. It's one of the three kind of key pillars of our strategy, alongside encouraging people to choose walking and looking at people from all walks of life within that. So today I'm going to be talking to you about our sort of community engagement work, which brings those three pillars together, I think, in the best example of what we do. So within our community engagement work, one of the key offers that we have is our community street audits. So there are quite unique methods of evaluating the quality of public space by taking the people that use the streets out to get their views on what is good and what is bad on those streets. So it's using their viewpoint, and obviously pairing that with our kind of expertise and our technical knowledge of streets, and then recommending changes to streets to local authorities. I think all of us here probably agree that vibrant streets create safer neighbourhoods, less fear of crime. I think this is what Emma was touching upon just now. And so that's really at the heart of what we're looking to do with our community street audits. Our community street audits sit alongside a couple of other kind of community engagement offers that we have, including school route audits and expert reviews and consultancy services, which tend to look at sort of more new developments, where community street audits and school route audits are looking at existing developments. And we do community engagement in a number of other different areas. It's all about looking at streets from the lived experiences of those who use them to overcome the barriers of walking. So why engage? We cannot design an effective street environment without a full appreciation of who it should serve. So good engagement is always inclusive, because it ensures the widest possible understanding of what the street is for, who will use it, and what that experience is like. Engagement creates opportunities to harness the wisdom of the community, develop channels for communication, and work up feasible ideas collaboratively. Part of the complexity of undertaking public engagement on the subject of street design is that perspective on the fundamental questions of what are the streets for and who are they for vary widely. So drivers may be looking at traffic pinch points, infrastructure for vehicles, and ways to travel from A to B. But when you're walking or cycling, it becomes more about the lived experience of the public realm. That's not only about transport and travel, but also about connecting your home to school, work and the shops, and offering space for community and socialising. So with our community street audits, we look at a number of different elements of the streets, from footway services to local information and wayfinding, maintenance and cleanliness of the street, crossings and crossing delays, seating, police presence, aesthetics and greenery, the use of space and obstructions. So these are some of the things that we would pick out. We would speak to the people on the community street audit about specifically, and get their views alongside how they feel, as Chris kind of mentioned earlier. And we see a variety of comments, obviously. In certain areas, people feel safer. People can pick out good dropped curbs or road closures. Obviously, the place that you live, work and play is where you're going to have the most understanding of on the street. So as mentioned, we also do school route audits, and this is a really nice way to engage young voices in the design of our streets. So we can help with travel plans, we can help schools get STARS accreditation through these methods, and we do them across the country at the moment. So a few examples of some CSAs where we've seen real change. So in Leeds, we audited the streets between the city centre and St James's University Hospital. This was commissioned by Leeds County Council's public health team. So we took local residents and other stakeholders out onto the street in the Lincoln Green area, which is a diverse community located close to Leeds city centre. Car ownership is low and accessibility to the city, either on foot or by bike, is not attractive and can be difficult due to the severance by major roads. So the recommendations from our street audits helped identify barriers to walking and potential improvements that eventually formed part of the £2.6 million scheme to improve walking and cycling links for the communities of Lincoln's Green. And we ended up having a real impact on that walk from the city centre to St James Hospital, which obviously impacts on people's commute, but also their access to the hospital itself. We also carried out a community street audit in North Halifax and provided recommendations to Calderdale Council to help inform work being undertaken by the Transforming Cities programme. Calderdale Council submitted strategic online cases to West Yorkshire Combined Authority in 2020, and the North Halifax scheme will provide new and improved infrastructure that will enable people in North Halifax to cycle and walk more often. So it created greater space for walking within residential neighbourhoods of Ovenden and Holmfield from the feedback we got from residents. This is a school route audit that we did in Surrey and Three Rivers. So we assisted 13 local people, including Bell Farm pupils, parents and staff, on the community route audit. And the recommendations from that report that we submitted were taken forward by the councillor, Mary Sheldon, and actually a purpose-built path was put through the recreation ground there to enable pupils a sort of easier route into the school. That was really well received by all of the children and residents at that school. Another school route audit we did at St John Plessington in the Wirral resulted in a new zebra crossing put in. The children had some issues in crossing a busy road and identified barriers there. So really nice example of Wirral County Council, Borough Council putting in a new crossing based on our school route audit and what the children recommended. So that's sort of existing developments where we take people out to hear their views, but we also look at the development of new developments. So we're currently working on the methodology of reviewing this, but we use our sort of technical ability and understanding of how walking environments should be put into new developments to comment on these. And we were brought in Kirk and Tillock to examine how changes to the street would affect how pedestrian focused it was. And we studied it before changes were made, after changes were made, and then brought people back to look at how the street infrastructure now worked for them. And that was really positive. So finally, we worked across Brent, Bristol, Morrington to answer three key questions. So one, is streetscape design something that residents should inform or something on which they can decide? Two, if negative emotion is the main motivator for taking part, and how do we ever move forward rather than simply reinforcing the status quo? And three, ward councillors had a key role to play in fronting the healthy neighbourhoods, but can face large groups of angry residents. So how can our democratic structures work with an engagement process to deliver progressive and ambitious change? And these were the three things that we outlined, three things that we came to conclude from that. So from a strategic framework, from the outset, any engagement programme must be embedded in the overall vision for the area. Engagement activities can allow for support or dissent, but must be held together by an unwavering strategic framework. With this in place, leadership, communications, ward councillors and the engagement team can work together to consider public feedback and finalise streetscape designs. 2 particular types of engagement activity will generate particular kinds of response. Large meetings can stifle quieter or differing views, but walkabouts and street chats in the open air involve everyone. Talking to individuals on their doorstep prompts a much healthier response. And 3, the follow-up. So offering quiet, safe space to residents outside meetings, on the phone or in the privacy of their own homes is a way to open up additional lines of communication. So noticing those who've been missed by the engagement programme can be followed up by focused work. Thank you.
And engagement is so much a topical subject, and many of you must have been involved in it. So, love to hear questions, reflections. Tom.
Thanks. Can I ask a question about framing? The classic that if you start a conversation with the word transport or traffic, you're sending people in a particular direction. If you talk instead about place, the conversation might go in a very different.
Yeah.
Well, how do you handle that? And is there a right answer? I know what I would choose. That's neither here nor there.
Let's just repeat the question.
So it's around framing of the questions with engaging local residents. I think that generally it's about trying not to lead questions and trying to get an open, honest response from those that you're engaging with. There are things, as I said, that we point out on streets, or we can ask specific questions around, because I think maybe what you're alluding to is that not everyone might understand the sort of more technical terms of transport, but also certain words can put barriers up. So yeah, it's about listening, trying to understand where people would go rather than trying to set a format or specify that.
Please.
Yeah, I think it's about it is hard, and it is about managing expectations. We've done numerous, community street audits and school route audits that get written into reports, and perhaps the funding isn't there to make changes straight away, and it may be a longer term solution. We have had that happen where it's been a couple of years or so and before recommendations have been taken forward. I think with anything, with managing expectations, it's setting that bar up front. So, we're trying to look at the space, we're trying to make it better. And that has been essentially commissioned, and that is something that, the council is interested in, wants to do. But that's always within the caveat of funding and prioritisation. And so, yeah, it's getting that feedback and then seeing what's possible from there.
Do you find, Tanya, sometimes you have a problem, say, in London, with poverty of expectations? So here's Adam and probably in Hackney as well, actually are keen to do things, and you've really got to initially maybe say, well, you can be more ambitious. Is that ever something where you say the world can be even more different than you can imagine?
I mean, definitely. I think we're all used to living in streets that have been designed around the motor car, or at least, for quite some time. So, especially, I think with the school route audits and the children, I think it's a nice thing to imagine. But yeah, sorry.
But just that sometimes you need to show people just how much can be achieved. That sometimes people suffer from a poverty of expectations where they don't think they can achieve what they actually possibly could achieve.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the job of all of us, isn't it? To highlight the good examples of what have happened and where they are and how they impact on our everyday lives. And it's something that Living Streets certainly is trying to do.
So Chris,
Going back to an earlier point, Braun, was the importance of to do walking meetings, and also the fact that bringing people together with differing opinions is often a really powerful way to actually get progress rather than sort of loggerheads. I see the community street audits being a hugely valuable tool and a really good way to bring the people together and actually pull through issues. Can you tell us a bit more about the process involved and how we can, as community members, to start community audits?
So the process generally starts from the commission of the local council to us, and then us finding, small groups of residents who use those streets to then take them out. So really, it's I guess it kind of stems from the council in the initial moment. We do work with a number of councils across the UK. It's something that we talk about a lot. But essentially, yes, I think it has to come from that desire to make change in the local area, which the council is responsible for.
Not going through the council, but for people at grassroots level with the support of Living Streets initiating something themselves, because it feels like if you're going to rely on the council, there might be very slow progress, I guess, in some areas. And I just wonder if it's grassroots led.
I certainly.
Is it not worked then? You're saying it doesn't really work enough.
I think the will and the funding is important, but I don't think that's a reason not to go down that route. I'm sure it could be successful. I don't have an example of it, but I think it's really important if there are things that local residents can get together and present to the council. I think that's definitely important to do. And as I say, I don't think it's something that can't happen at all. It helps if the will and the funding is there. Yeah.
Please, we
about the process you go through, but how you ensure that you can reach all communities. Because obviously in the school route, it's great you can take classes out and whatever, that you get to the youngsters. But in my experience, it's really difficult any sort of engagement, particularly in person. I'm going to probably upset some people. If you end up with a lot of older people, I'm getting older now too. I'm now starting to moan more. And I can see that they tend to moan more. Again, Footways picking up this, but it's seeing the possibility that younger people coming to the events or walking around. How do you get to them? Really? Is there is there on social media? Now again, I'm not very good at either. But are there techniques that you've got that you can get to them? All people?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is so important to what we do with our community street audits, is getting that range of people and getting all voices heard. So affinity groups through their networks, forums, like you say, social media. So other groups who are interested in the walking environment, or even just going walking in an urban setting, could be different cultural groups who do led walks, for example. We have lots of different networks within local areas, could be disability groups, and contacting those to ensure the range is there. We do have a lot of schools. They also have the networks.
Those lots of them, anyway, so there's the way in. Whereas, I can see Carlton doing the local part. And actually sometimes you get the different silos together, people, officers from different parts of the local party talking on the street, walking around. It's quite interesting to see that they've got similar objectives.
Yeah.
There's different ways of actually implementing standard ways that they've often done in the past, and not talk to some other parts of their officers.
Like the different departments. Yeah.
Thank you. My ears picked up when you said about councils, public health part of the mission here. Is there any different dynamic when you have a public health team pushing or promoting the scheme? My guess is it's extremely powerful. I also love the NHS with all the questions we've done there for a lot of people. But if David to really kind of promote this scheme, active travel and this is presentation pointed out about being in activity. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think where public health and transport strategies can tie together, that's really, really powerful. And I think Newham has a good example at the moment of using the hospital and looking at transport and how that kind of social prescribing and daily commute can be used as ways to improve the health of those in the borough. I'm not sure, to be perfectly honest, in that particular example as to whether there was a different dynamic. But I think that, like this gentleman was saying, you know, the goal is the same. It's trying to get people to use walking to get from A to B in terms of Leeds. So it was to encourage people to walk to the hospital. As part of an alliance called the Sustainable Transport Alliance, which is a network of sort of bus, train, active travel groups. We're currently looking at engaging with the NHS to look at sort of the, you know, trust sites and doing more of that sort of work as to wayfinding within their local area, but also encouraging their staff and patients to use walking more in the sort of trust location.
Well, my impression of the NHS is it's just a very divided sort of organisation. So when in Islington we were trying to encourage doctors to support and hospitals to support low traffic neighbourhoods. Berks, which is around the corner, which is incredibly supportive. And at the Whittington, there are obviously the people in charge like to drive there and refuse to let any of their staff support the low traffic neighbourhoods. So it's a very mixed picture, I think, depending on where you are, and what the interest of the senior medics are. Have you found that? Or?
I mean, we've certainly worked with some NHS trusts and not others, so I assume that is the case. Yeah, I think there's a job still to do there.
And finally, it's wonderful that you're engaging with children whose interests have so often been neglected in the design of our streets. Could you say a little bit about the practicalities of doing that and how you approach the schools and what actually happens?
So, I mean, we bring together pupils, their parents where we can, and teachers to go out for the walks, clipboards, note down things, again, sort of point out certain areas of accessibility, crossings, looking at, you know, how essentially the school street and the surrounding area, and working with them on that. It's good to get that kind of range of views from the school children, but also the parents and the teachers, because they all have slightly differing views potentially. You want more of the process? I mean, there are different people in all schools who might be interested in doing a school route audit. We work with a number of schools with our behaviour change programme, WOW. So we have links with, you know, over 2,000 schools within England. But if we were looking to do a school route audit alone, then I think it's, yeah, approaching the school. I mean, maybe the head in the first instance, but you quite often get sort of sustainable or transport champions within schools who are, you know, particularly interested in better walking and active travel around the school.
Great. Any more? Thank you so much, Tanya. That's great. And finally, we have, is it Mark Shields to talk about Carlton Vale Boulevard and the transformation of the main street. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm ready. So let's go to the next slide. Yes, hi everyone. Yeah, so my name is Marcus Shields. I'm going to talk about Carlton Vale Boulevard, which is on the next slide. And I suppose this is more at the design end of the conversations we're having. The project is something we've been working on for a couple of years. And it really addresses the questions over how we deal with more transport-based infrastructure or larger streets. I know we speak a lot about LENs or Mini Holland or Broadway Market, but this really looks at how we deal with what is considered a primary transport route in the south of Brent. So the project, so Carlton Vale exists as a street, but I suppose the Carlton Vale Boulevard was the working title that Brent came up with for the brief. And you probably can imagine, but Carlton Vale is in a relatively deprived area of South Kilburn. It suffers from a lot of the problems that many other London streets have suffered over the years. And I suppose, I think the picture which probably sums it up is the kind of picture in the top right, where really it's quite car dominated. So I'll have a quick run through of the kind of design development, touching consultation, but we'll keep that fairly light. And then we'll just have a look at the kind of the vision or the CGI images as such. So Carlton Vale is being delivered as part of South Kilburn regeneration plan. So the plan identifies a lot of new residential interventions, a lot of new commercial, and Carlton Vale is really the spine which holds that together. As part of the project, we are lead consultants, so we're landscape architects, which I suppose means it's place-led or green infrastructure-led. And of course, we have a team assisting us. I think in the context of the team, probably the most significant part of the brief was the appointment of an air quality consultant so that we could do before measuring, hopefully build the scheme, and then measure after to hopefully demonstrate some tangible benefits in air quality. And the ecologist also was quite important to help write that brief of what the green infrastructure may look like. So the master plan has been adopted, and as I say, Carlton Vale is the line which runs through the centre. And I suppose oddly, the thing with Carlton Vale, most people don't know where it is, but it actually collects two relatively affluent areas, Queen's Park and Maida Vale. And really, when you look at Queen's Park, Carlton Vale was quite similar, but it went through quite a lot of, dare I say, urban decline. So it is actually worth doing a little bit of historic mapping, and it's not hugely in depth, but Carlton Vale was built as a kind of a late Victorian residential area. And I think this photo is great because it shows the trees which were, so they had a boulevard and then they lost their boulevard, and some of those trees actually still exist. So the two images below show we had active frontage, we had resale, we had commerce, and then what we have now is very little of that. And I suppose this just quickly looks at the kind of gradual declines from left of the screen to right. You can see that in the kind of late 1896, we had nicely connected streets. And I suppose by the kind of 60s, 70s, we were starting to see some of the streets becoming fragmented, some built intervention. And by the time we get to 1991, Carlton Vale is topped by a roundabout, a flyover, and you can just see that the streets really don't connect. So what we went from, and the master plan is aiming to try and get back to some of that original street pattern. And photos tell a really great story about that. So in the 1950s and 60s, a lot of this is well documented, but the kind of photos of beautiful buildings, but not in great condition. And the photo in the bottom right, you'll see in a second what Peel Road became, and the Falcon Pump still exists, but it's almost in isolation now, whereas there it looks like the centre of the community. So, of course, a lot of Carlton Vale during the 50s, 60s and 70s had a lot of this type of built intervention. And I think it's interesting, so the image in the top right, the Falcon Pub's still there, but now it's overshadowed by a huge tower. The Peel Precinct, the Peel Street at the bottom became Peel Precinct, and that's actually currently being knocked down. So in 40 years, we went from building something and then knocking it down again, which is in itself surprising. So this was the image we used for the bid, actually. And I suppose it's quite an emotive image. We're trying to say, putting green infrastructure, putting nature, putting, dare I say, birds, butterflies at the centre. And I suppose we're trying to allude to something which potentially looks like shared space, but of course, we know that that is inherently controversial in kind of larger roads. So from the basis of this, we worked through the design. And I think the key thing with Carlton Vale was the idea of separation, I suppose, of the pedestrian realm, the cycling realm, and the carriageway, and really reducing the impact of vehicles. And that was achieved through improved lighting, improved crossings, you know, to really give that sense that the cars were reducing dominance. And I suppose physically, reduction of the carriageway itself almost starts to engender that kind of reversal of car dominance versus what we're trying to achieve. And in the image, I suppose, the master plan addresses some of the kind of lack of activation or the eyes on the streets, and the boulevard itself ties that together. So on a technical level, we have got to, I suppose, a kind of REBA stage 4 design. This drawing makes it look fairly succinct, but I suppose getting to this point has taken us 3 years with extensive consultation. And I think we are still, whilst it is a street, we're still identifying key civic spaces. There's a functionality of the street is dealt with on the kind of northern side, which responds to the majority of the new built master plan, and the kind of parking and loading and drop-off functions done on that side of the street. And then we would have a separated cycle lane on both sides of the street. And as I say, the area in blue is what is called the Premier Gyratory. That will be removed as a separate project. And really, this starts to look at what can be done. And this is the drawing we're very much working on the basis of just now. In terms of parking numbers, we did a parking beat survey. And whilst it would be bold to say no parking at all, we felt as though we could reduce parking by about 20%, which is in itself doesn't seem like a huge figure, but I suppose that's quite significant. And in terms of parking, we're allowing for electric vehicle charging for 20% of the bays, with further provision for 60% of the bays. I think the London plan says electric vehicle parking will be provided for 80% of parking spaces. So, you know, the street there is quite a significant change. And as I say, there is a lot happening down there just now. And actually some of the buildings are already being finished just at the corner with Kilburn Park Road. There's a new building which is open. So by the time Carlton Vale is finished or started, a lot of the projects will be underway. And I think that will hugely help what is quite an unloved part of Brent. And I think I mentioned trees, and obviously an inherent part of the boulevard is the trees. An individual I showed earlier, we had thought we would be going for 1 or 2 kind of boulevard species to create something more like a Parisian style boulevard. But actually during the consultation, the residents were very keen to have a mixture. So it's going to be slightly more woolly or slightly more natural, but that gives it a degree of bioresilience. And it means that future proofing in terms of ash claret dieback or Dutch elm disease, you know, the street will hopefully be there. We left the London planes in place. There's about 70 existing trees, and we felt as though keeping those in place is obviously very much part and parcel of the project. So I won't go into the technicalities of the tree species, but it's a mixed species street with seasonal change and variety. And as part of the projects, one of the key aspirations was to create rain gardens or suds. And I think we've been able to get in a lot of those in between the cycle lane and the carriageway. And this is very much supported by Brent's biodiversity action plan, and also Brent's bee corridor, which was one of their initiatives which Carlton Vale ties to. So I suppose the plants will be quite a variety of species, and what they're trying to achieve is they're phytosensor plants, so that's pollution reducing, either by filtering particles or by the particles sticking to the plants and then the rain washing them off. So this is very much, these are images actually of a scheme in Sheffield designed by Nigel Dunnett. So that's very much the aspiration for Carlton Vale. And I'd say there's quite a lot of technical, I suppose, relatively mundane bits and pieces, but a lot of this is supported by TfL guidance. So we're not actually reinventing the wheel in any of these cases, but I think what we are able to achieve is really what Waltham Forest have been able to do on Leverage Road, which is the top right image, that kind of separation between vehicles. and cyclists, and giving that kind of increased safety, which would be associated with that. And everything really at the centre of what we're doing is to make it more of an inclusive and accessible street. So I mentioned consultation. I mean, I'll touch on it lightly, but we actually started working on the project during COVID. And we then had to come up with a consultation strategy, which was far-reaching and worthwhile. So we ended up doing a lot of online consultation events, which are promoted through emails, digital leaflets and posters. And we actually had reasonable attendance. I think Brent were quite happy with the number of people, but as reference, we were sending out 750 leaflets and we were getting 20 attendees. So attendance was not bad, but as I say, we had some very worthwhile input. And of course, Brent themselves had to sign off their own scheme. So we met endlessly with Brent departments to talk about highways, drainage, trees, parking and lighting. And that's the kind of, I suppose, the technical aspect is part and parcel of what the project has become. And as I say, there's a few other consultees, and because it was down at the bottom corner, we had to consult with Westminster. And I know that's almost a London specific thing where one project stops and it changes borough. So we did look at trying to kind of continue on either side, but of course Westminster have their own agenda. And it wasn't all boring technical stuff. We actually had a social value aspect to the project, which was part of our offer at the bid. So we took some local residents on a beekeeping course, and we provided an apiary in Braunsbury Park. And actually that was just part of the kind of tying with the kind of initiative of the bee corridor. And it's really just making sure that Carlton Vale has a wider impact as opposed to just the object itself. We conducted a community walk round to look at good precedent schemes. We chose Camden because Camden has lots of good schemes. We went through Bloomsbury to King's Cross, and a lot of residents really got the kind of notion of what we were trying to achieve by seeing it physically. And as I say, Camden and Westminster have done some very good things for using as an example. And I suppose we have an ongoing social value agenda to make sure that the community is involved throughout, which is important. So if you ever go to Braunsbury Park and you glance out the train, you'll see a small apiary just at the side of the rail tracks. And I'm just going to quickly run through some before and after images. So this shows, I suppose, some of the heritage buildings on the right and some of the new buildings. And the image after shows what we're aspiring Carlton Vale to become. Now, I will say the buildings on the right are designed by Paul R. Thompson Edwards. Those are not us, but I think you can see the kind of activation and the reconnection streets which the project aims to bring. And also, if I go back up, you know, the small civic space is fairly unloved, and we're able to create what is, I suppose, a small, almost a pocket-sized civic space. The next image is down at that space level itself. As I say, you can see the width of the roads. And that is, again, slightly aspirational. We're kind of working through the technical requirements now of what the underground services are saying, but we think something like this is perfectly achievable. And the last image was the one I introduced with. And again, this is, and I think the key thing is by the reduction of the carriageway, in simple terms, you really are kind of hopefully reducing the velocity and the speed of vehicles, and really pulling that public rail out. So again, to go back up, I think there's quite a difference between what it is at present and what it could become. Yes, and I think in many respects, Carlton Vale is hopefully going to start on site this year, and hopefully will be built over the next few years. Just a little bit on funding. So the project has three-part funding. It's funded. It's around about £6.5 million. It's funded by Strategic Cllr, Highways Infrastructure Fund, and also a little bit of Section 106 funding, which is specifically allocated for the Boulevard trees themselves. So we're just at the process of getting this finalised and signed off. And as I say, hopefully we're very excited to see the project built. I haven't quite finished. The last thing is just, Oh no. Just going to hopefully finish on an animation. I'm not sharing, sorry. So this gives a little bit of the vision of what we're trying to achieve. And as I say, I think the sense of scale, this video is quite good at giving the sense of scale and the enclosure which will be created, and the idea that the cars are less dominant. So the different scale of trees are some of the existing trees and some of the new trees, but I think you can see here with the separation, hopefully what is achieved is a huge change from what's there at present. That's it. Yeah.
Just a question, qualification. So on one side of the road, the cycle lane is segregated from the road by the suds and the parking.
Yes.
But on the other side of the road, you have the cycle lane and then the suds. Oh, sorry. So sorry, Mark. On one side of the road, you have the suds and the parking and then the cycle lane. And on the other side of the road, you have the cycle lane next to the road and then the suds. Can you explain what the thinking was behind that?
Yes, I mean, it is quite a good question because perhaps it looks slightly odd. So because the existing trees were retained, although Carlton Vale looks like quite a handsome wide street, it was around about 18 metres. And because the northern side functioned as the car parking loading side, there's an inherent 2.5 to 3 metre strip which had to be included there. So if you do the maths and measure, we had aspired to get, I suppose, the planting on the southern side to do the same, but actually it would have meant a much more reduced cycle lane width. We were trying to go for more like the widths that Waltham Forest have achieved, 1.8, 2 metres, 2.2. So it does seem slightly odd, but as I say, if we were being super bold and we could have removed all the parking, potentially we could have had that, but it still functions as a place with schools and drop off and
And obviously you're incredibly fortunate that it was a wide road, and there seems to be some additional parking off the road as well, was there, which helps.
Yes, I mean, I suppose to explain the fundamental principle of the master plan context is that they're car-free developments. So hopefully there's a natural reduction in cars, but there is car parking permitted on the side streets. And the parking beat survey very much said that Carlton Vale is not fully utilised in terms of parking by about 20%. So yes, so the side streets function as part of that, and they will only get better once they're fully connected up. Just now, if you go to Carlton Vale, it's quite fragmented. It is hard to find. People don't know where it is.
I hadn't heard of it until I heard your talk. I'm certainly going to go there, and great ideas for Finchley Road. Any questions, Chris?
It's an interesting feature at the moment. Have you had any issues with inflation and budgets and having to strip anything out, or have you managed to control that?
Do you know, it's a very of the moment question. I met with the council yesterday and we had the project signed off about a year ago, and even if you just hit it with 7 to 10%. So we've got a few things in our bag in terms of not reducing the suds, not reducing the porous paving, but just trying to take out some of the, to use the term, slightly posher materials. So we're still saying it will be a London street with, I suppose, granite curbs. We're still trying to retain that. We're certainly advocating the trees because they have separate funding and the suds, but £6.5 million times 7 to 10%, we will have to make a few savings.
Glad to go there.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think we've always said we can't deliver Brent a street, we have to deliver a boulevard, and that's part of it. But it's an immediate issue, yeah. So thank you.
Please, can I ask
About the subs and adoption process.
Yes.
Are they adopted?
Uh,
Who adopts them?
Well, our client is Brent Highways, who own the land, and Brent Highways it is the adopted highway. So they have agreed in principle that they will adopt the SUDs, which is not all boroughs are keen to do so. So yes, the adoption will be with Brent, and they actually have an external maintenance contractor. I didn't touch on maintenance, but obviously it's quite important to make sure that what is done on day one looks good on year 10. So it would be an external maintenance contractor who would do that.
Where does the money come from? It's going to be earmarked to all this Boulevard, so it's protected. You know where that can...
Well, yes. I mean, I suppose Brent have kind of bought into the fact that they will be obliged to kind of maintain a slightly extra street. Getting down to the contractual kind of minutiae, we've actually allowed for a 5-year maintenance period, which is an exceptional period. And that's to make sure that by the time it's handed over to somebody, it will be hopefully in pretty good shape. I suppose lastly, just to say the SUDs are not, they're still positively connected. You know, they're not the, in London, it's quite a challenge to do anything that the kind of percolation type SUDs we still have. So that's helped reassure Brent. Yeah.
You said it was quite an involved consultation process. I wonder what were the points of greatest difference and how did you work towards consensus?
Well, I suppose that we generally had, I suppose, quite negative feedback of why are you spending money or why are you involved. But I think the biggest point of contention was the cycle lane. We'd originally envisaged a 2-lane cycle lane on the northern side, and we'd used Camden's Royal College Street as the example. And Brent's cycling campaign quite rightly said, well, how does that tie to the bits you're not in control of? And that, I suppose, because we did the 2-way cycle lane on the northern side as part of the bid, then when we started looking at the connections, there were some challenges at either end. So whilst potentially you're creating something good for a mile, it was that kind of wider connections. So I suppose we looked at options in terms of what we're trying to achieve, and actually the design you see now with flow or either side is that change. So I think, I mean, Brent's cycling campaign were quite positive in terms of what they were wanting, but quite rightly, I suppose it was just that because it literally is sandwiched in that little bit of the borough, we had 2 connections at either end, which would be compromised. I think that was the biggest. A lot of other comments, you know, for example, there was a request for fruit trees on the street, but I think fruit trees are, again, quite aspirational. They're not particularly great street trees, and there are ongoing maintenance issues with something such as a fruit tree in that. You know, we said you can have fruit trees, but potentially in the parks, not in the punk realm as such.
So local residents were generally supportive of what you were doing. You said something about why you're spending money. What was the general atmosphere amongst people who know that they're here?
At the start, I suppose, yeah. I mean, there was a bit of, I suppose, 1 or 2 people just turned up and they were quite negative. But I think we had quite a robust case because Carlton Vale Boulevard isn't our idea. It's kind of signed off in the master plan for the South Kilburn. So it had been signed off for 5 or 6 years. And I suppose the funding was kind of driven from, because the funding model was driven from strategic Cllr, and that funding was particularly allocated to Carlton Vale. It wasn't, not to say it wasn't costing Brent money, but it wasn't as though they were, you know, digging into the pockets, as I understand. So we were able to kind of reconcile that. And I think, I suppose with the increased footfall and the changes, I think people understand. So whilst they were critical of us doing the work, they were also not really using Carlton Vale to its potential. So I think they could see that it could become something else. Yeah.
Else? So when Adam was talking about Haverstock Hill, he talked about how Camden are putting in lots of zebra crossings. Is this something you were able to do as well?
Yes, Carlton Vale actually there had been a scheme design in 2016 where they put in a number of crossings, but we were able to increase the number. And I suppose that north-south severance is but it wasn't quite like Haversalt Hill where they didn't exist. So we were able to put crossings in. And I suppose at the key junctions, we're able to kind of go for more of a raised table. I won't use the term shared space because that was never an option or never spoken about. But we were always able to achieve that kind of vertical deflection to reduce vehicles, and then controlled crossings at certain distances, and then uncontrolled crossings. So it's hopefully it does a big job in terms of reducing that north-south severance.
May not have been paying attention properly, but I'm concerned that it's called a boulevard, which is something you walked along, enjoyed, and played ball on. Your animation looks like a great whooshing through the tunnel. Did you not feel the need to try and create some experiences along the route?
I mean, I suppose the animation is probably, it's obviously a flyover, so it's not giving the kind of the subtlety or the sensitivity of what the planting will achieve at the lower level. So it almost is in that regard similar to the kind of Parisian style boulevard where, the street scene is on the side or the activation is on the side. So the animation is probably not doing it justice in that regard. But I think with the new master plan or the new activation on the edge, and then the kind of rich planting palettes, similar to some of the images we were showing before, will give that extra layer of richness. Yes. Because as I say, at present just now, it's fairly featureless, and you don't necessarily feel, dare I say, too comfortable walking along it at present. So hopefully it'll address some of that scale issue and bring it down to a more human scale.
Following on from Chris's funding point, were you able to get any money from Thames Water for the subs, as it potentially is a cost-saving event? And it's good corporate responsibility.
That hasn't been forthcoming at present. We have an allowance in for Thames Water to adjust some of the infrastructure below to get the trees in. But I suppose as some of the funding is coming from central government, potentially Thames Water are contributing that, but not in a tangible way. I suppose one of the ways we got the project signed off at budget was the fact that we are improving drainage, we are improving biodiversity, and we are improving that experience. So nothing directly from Thames Water.
And, it does seem that 6.5 million is really quite cheap for transforming a part of London. When you think that Highways England, or whatever they're called now, might spend £1 billion on a roundabout, you begin to think what you could do to London's main roads.
Yes, I mean, as a typology, 6.5 million for a mile-long road seems, relatively good value. If you think what they spent on the Royal Mile in Edinburgh, it was quite different. So yeah, it's not, I suppose the costs are not hugely prohibitive. I think last week the Camden High Line was announced, and it's a fantastic project, but it's in the region of 55 million, and that's great, but these are big sums. So I think 6.5 million seems like quite good value. I think it's good value compared to engineering works or highways works.
Yes, it's great value argument coming forward. And just going back to the Richard's point, I think the client obviously probably likes that quiet, the traffic, the site is moving very cleanly along that route. So quietly does sort of declare that tunnel movement along the route. But when you show the old photographs of the tunnel, sometimes if we were walking through the street, maybe there's not more subtlety going on, and you might get buildings that do still get forward and slow the traffic down, and you sort of see a building or you move. I think that's part of the sort of placemaking that we're obviously keen to see how that knits in, and probably is right. Probably is the animator who's done quite like that. Then you've got your tree you've got in the head, but
yeah,
there wasn't that feeling of the historical buildings or even the new buildings that have been posed, sort of how slow people down and start breaking that mile. It's only a mile, but you could imagine quite a number of events and it's just slightly in terms of orientation. Or maybe it is, but you just couldn't see it on Earth.
Yeah, the fly through possibly makes it look. I mean, I think what on the master plan, a lot of the historic buildings are retained. And the Falcon Pub, which I mentioned, is unfortunately potentially earmarked for removal, but there are existing schools, existing churches, but of course they have to be behind what is the highway. So in terms of closing the space in, Brent Highway still have a wide street. So I suppose if you go down there, certainly what they've done, a lot of the buildings are set back and don't really respond to the street, but certainly what they've done is they tend to have brought things forward and really closed that scale down. So hopefully, as I say, hopefully the master plan addresses some of that issue. Yeah, because if you go into Queen's Park and you start walking along the street at Queen's Park, you know, the scale is much closer to what Carlton Vale used to be. It's a very good street just across the rails.
Well, that's a great project. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Now, while Robert is ransacking, and if he wants to speak, the Urban Design Group Cllr for the fine wine for the networking part of the evening, I just wondered if anybody had any general reflections about their own work on better streets, engagement, concerns about gentrification, safety, etc. Whether anyone, please.
My question is about, I found this project very interesting, and I found there was a big contrast between the first four and the last. And Dick's comment, and I don't think that has been exactly addressed. But my question is more about what can urban designers do? I mean, you showed the analysis, you have done a lot of understanding, the interviews, fantastically interesting. There's a lot of knowledge, a lot of oral history and all that sort of stuff. But that market, which is so crowded now because it is now gentrified, so how is there any way that an urban designer can actually do something to rebalance the shared use of these kind of spaces? I mean, to make them really a place-making role.
Well, Chris is an obvious person to answer that. Does anybody else want to say anything about it? It's a very good question.
I think just before Chris goes on, obviously you're at a sharp end. Historically, I've been at a sharp end in the past doing projects like this, and what I found was I forgot that I was a professional, and I actually found that actually what I spent most of my time on was actually educating or discussing like we're discussing now, and actually going off and seeing other places. So we would take a number of politicians and officers and local business people, whatever, to see places. And, you know, this is going back sort of 20, 30 years, and actually seeing them and then coming back and getting quite excited about seeing that they could actually work where you are, and trying to forget to say, well, I'm a designer, so I should know all these things, because you don't know it. You're really learning every single day, every single job, something goes, and not being frightened of actually asking questions and saying things that maybe people say you look stupid. When I did it, I was young when I did it, and I could get away with saying stupid things and say, oh, sorry, now it's harder because they look at you and think you've got experience, you should know better. You never know enough. So I was almost like, don't ever worry about saying something stupid, but just keep talking and keep discussing things, and eventually you come up with something that is deliverable. It can be costed, you know, and keep working at it. Try not to be too controlling when you present ideas or put things forward. Just being very open and just keep going, enthusiastic. Just keep pushing at the things. It's so easy to give up. But that's me still thinking, you know, positively. But I think Chris does an awful lot of this. No, he's got some better.
Well, I didn't have controlling in mind at all. Quite the reverse.
No,
so it was a matter of just how can you change these places so that they're more livable, because that was a scene, wasn't it? And who does it and how, and so that is another issue. And I agree with you. Of course, I do what you do. I've done all my life, so I'm very much on your side on that one. But then ultimately, you want to improve the place. That's why you do that. I mean, you want to understand it, and then you would say, not you personally, but together, you know. And just like it's a genuine question, you know, what we are only a specific role. We're not on this side or anything like that. So what is our part in all this to actually improve the situation? That's what my point.
I think the other aspect of it is, again, sort of thinking about we often talk about the collaborative elements of urban design, and I think that sort of collaboration has to go back the other way slightly. Sometimes when you receive a brief to do a project, it's about sort of having the sort of healthy challenge of that brief as well, and actually thinking and going back to my talk about the sort of the scales you can start to look at streets. Actually, I think urban design is a very powerful tool to sort of actually lift yourself a bit higher than often we think about streets and get straight into the detail of curb heights and actually think, well, what are the societal and larger issues that we can solve in this project, and then start to do some of the research around that and actually augment that original brief, which might have been we want to reinstate a boulevard along Carlton Vale and actually think about actually what are the sort of social aspects we can do, as I talk about sort of the B's, that sort of aspects, and what else can we do with this project and this investment, which can actually hit a lot of other agendas that might not have been in the original brief at the time. But that's a collaboration with the client as well about sort of taking their investment and sort of doubling down on it is key, and speaks very much to that, what we can do with urban designers to create better places.
Robert.
It's from Ulrika Kern, and I suppose it follows up that general point. She makes the point that there seem to be no funding or regular planning mechanisms that require well-designed streets. What regulatory or other incentives are there for developers that can be used, and who should pay for the better designed street?
Any thoughts? Martin, you look as if you have that. You look as if you're about to see that. Single thing, I'm sorry. Can I have a thought at answering that from the floor?
Thank you.
Thousands of years ago, I was working on looking at how we could improve streets in housing areas in Cheshire. This was 49 years ago. And one of the things we thought is that we should spend less of the road resource, 30% of it was the land was used for roads, and put it into landscaping and housing. And we said we should narrow the roads and we should make them wiggly. Now, one of the lessons to come out of this is that if you make places nice, you narrow the roads and you make them wiggly. That's 49 years ago we were saying that. Why are we still having to say it today? What are the forces that are forcing us to not use our resources sensibly? That's gone a long way from trying to answer the question up there. But I think it's about moving resources around. That's how you get the things done. And you have to have a will to do that.
Anybody want to respond to?
I think one aspect of the question as well is that better streets don't necessarily cost more money. I think, as Dick alluded to, it's incredibly expensive to asphalt 18 meters of width of street and then maintain it. And I think in terms of what's stopping us from doing it, I think, well, Adam, you'll know from a political perspective, I think it's very difficult to make large scale changes, and it takes a lot of time and momentum and changing people's attitudes. So I think we're like society is guilty of sort of perpetuating certain activities, and until that kind of market demand starts to want something else, we're not going to see those large scale changes of it.
Political will must play an enormous part. And what would you see as the main barriers to achieving better streets? I mean, you've done so much.
I think once you have the political will and the right expertise in the council and the right policy, everything aligns and it can be very transformational. I think political will is the key. It's hard to generalize. It's very context and personality dependent, very dependent on people's localities. I think it's probably about understanding, again, referring to what councils need to do amongst ourselves. It's about mentoring and helping understand that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and seeing what people go into public service for a reason. They should hope people to leave a legacy at the end of it. There are many examples of big projects where you really make a difference to the street or a town, which should hopefully inspire elected members to want to kind of take that chance. And there's also lately there's plenty of evidence, certainly in the London elections anyway, where those boroughs that were leading on this did well, and there's other reasons for those results as well, but didn't really think harm many people at all.
I mean, there's plenty of evidence out there that on sort of the financial side that we can perhaps make the roads
on the streets, the sort of wiggly and sort of narrower and more attractive and tree lined. I'm just thinking of an example near us in Dorset. It's near Dorchester, and that's obviously where our king has been dabbling for the last 20 odd years. And if you look at if you talk to the builders who build the homes, they can't believe, because they originated in Dorset, Philip Fryers and Son and Morris Builders. They can't believe that last year they were selling flats in the middle of the edge of Dorchester for over 3 or 4 million quid, which they couldn't believe they would be able to do that. And that's because the environment they're saying has actually raised the value, so that the streets are really attractive and walk around. And they say people come from London and go, crikey, that's cheap. Well, no, we could be we're buying a bigger flat down in here, close to the Weymouth, pretty well, and the streets feel very friendly and attractive, and they're paying that sort of money. I'm not sure that's the right thing, but I'm just saying that what other designers see, that if you build the environment correctly and it's very people friendly and attractive, there is a premium there. And I think they were saying 25% premium they were getting on what they were putting in. So that's a big incentive.
These, sorry, Camilla, is it?
Yes,
Yeah.
Camilla Weenham, Wandsworth Living Streets. I really want to appeal to any advice from anybody in here. One of the things that we've been dealing with in Wandsworth, which is completely stalemated at the moment, is the conflict between cycles and pedestrians along the river. So between Wandsworth Bridge and Chelsea Bridge, roughly, there's a nice walkway along there. Cycles are allowed to cycle along it. And there is constant tension between the two user groups and a lot of hysteria, quite frankly. Nobody seems to want to think about a solution. The local MP has been down to look at it, officers, we've had walks up and down, but nobody seems to be willing to take any kind of position about this. So instead, they just kind of pull back and don't tackle it. So I'm just wondering if anybody's got any sort of thoughts or advice on how to deal with that.
Well, Camilla, you must have thought about it a lot. Is there a solution?
Well, my personal thing would be, cycles be a bit more considerate, perhaps. So a few signs have been put up, actually, I think by the local authority, sort of saying, cyclists, please cycle slowly, whatever that means. It means something different to almost every cyclist. So I would appeal to sort of considerate cycling and pedestrians kind of sharing the space and mingling. But, the very angry kind of pedestrian lobby don't want cyclists there at all and want to move them off. So I'm just...
I remember, I'm afraid to say, at the taxpayers' expense many years ago, I was sent to do an inquiry into walking and went to various places in Europe. And it was fascinating. In Ferrara, there were just lots of cyclists and pedestrians all mixing, and it was accepted part of the culture. And there were old ladies in fur coats and mobile phones. Did they have them in 2000? I'm not sure. Wandering around, everybody seemed to think it was perfectly acceptable. And then you went to Munich, and they said that we couldn't dream of having pedestrians and cyclists in the same space. So I think it's quite a cultural specific thing about how people feel about it.
Ruth Cass has come online. This is a knee-jerk reaction. Oops, sorry. This is a knee-jerk reaction. Many families enjoy cycling along the river. The police need to be managing poor behaviour. Roads do not get closed driving because of fast, poor driving. And they did, she says, ban cycling during COVID, and it was really awful.
And we had someone, I think it's from English Heritage or Historic England. Is that right? You want to say?
No, it was just on the point of the regulatory side, and most people already know, but in terms of statutory consultees from June, Active Travel England will be a statutory consultee on certain development schemes and also highways upgrade schemes, which may encourage improvement and add weight to that sort of regulatory policy regime. So that's good news.
And a question I've been itching to ask you, if you'll excuse me, is having spent a lot of time with building and historic building enthusiasts. When I was young, completely oblivious to the public realm. So they go look at their historic buildings and they didn't really care whether it was in the middle of a motorway or to a roundabout, and they just say, oh, 5 days, Palladian influence, extension. I think it's changing now, so that historic building enthusiasts get a sense of.
I would say being more holistic view now.
But having seen what's happened in the Strand, how you can now enjoy Meredith Strand is.
Yes, no, I think certainly from my point of view, my role is one that deals with areas and places rather than specific buildings usually, and I run lots of grant schemes, the Heritage Action Zones, and they are kind of their holistic scheme that takes the place as a whole and deals with not only the built heritage but also the spaces between buildings to try and improve all of them to secure the conservation of the historic place, if you like.
That's great news. Sorry, I interrupted? Do you want to say?
No, I was only going to support the comment about the cultural differences. If you go to the Netherlands, cyclists and people behave quite normally when they're mixed together. Here, I think we just got used to the idea of separating them. Maybe we should mix together more. I live on the north side of the river and we have a really rigid cycle route which avoids these conflicts that you get near Battersea Power Station and things. But it is a matter of culture, isn't it, and familiarity.
Sorry, did you want to say?
I just wanted to say that there's also projects like the RSA's Heritage Growth, Lease of Growth, which very much connect heritage organisations with civil partners, and I think particularly when you're talking about social value and community food and ideas like the parish acre, there's a lot of good.
Did everybody catch that? You want to? Did you hear what?
Sorry, I have a background in libraries, which I'm sure has lowered the octave of my I was just signposting for projects like the Heritage for Inclusive Growth project, which is towards the space at the Royal Society of the Arts, which connects heritage organisations to different civil institutions to kind of align our objectives as well. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be done there, and so far as the kind of social value projects like the community food growing and ideas like the parish acre coming across them.
Perhaps Historic England should be part of the urban design group, if not already.
Yeah, I agree.
Please.
So this is just a note of appreciation of all the work that goes into making proper community engagement and getting being as inclusive as possible. So I'm the founder of a company called Wild Streets, and we're using augmented reality to allow people to place trees and plants and street furniture to create a tool that allows everyone to create spaces in real time. And it's just so rewarding to hear about all the different approaches and efforts going into engaging at street level children to like from map storytelling. And it's just really appreciate the lineup today.
And could you tell us a bit about your successes and where you've been working?
So we're currently developing the app. And speaking to councils, and we're one of the efforts of this also to inform locals, but also planners about the benefits of nature. So we're working with iTree, Treeconomics about being able to so people can place site relevant species. And at the same time informing them about the ecosystem service benefits of the design they're making. And what's so interesting about that it allows people to reload other people's scenarios for location, and even take, for example, this wonderful Vale that we saw described before, that we saw vision before. You could have that reloaded at site level, so you could walk around with your phone as a community level and experience what is suggested, and you can respond to that and move things around and create your own additions to such a design.
And do you do any work in Hackney? I think this is something Emma would love to hear about.
Yeah, I would love to.
I know from discussions with Adam's equivalent, the lead councillor in Islington, where I live, that they're very keen to do this, and they'd love to take up the parking spaces and plant trees, but they're very uncertain about the most cost-effective ways of doing it and how much the subs are going to cost And when, you know, and so the whole array of uncertainty about it, and if they could get a better sense of what the cost might be, and then also there's all the problem with the utilities and how much they charge to do anything and how obstructive they are. But I don't know whether anybody knows how you get hold of more certain cost-effective ways of planting trees in parking places.
There is a proposal for a national underground utilities code, which needs to break surface this year. There is a national utilities database that is being rolled out. I think it's due to completion, I believe, the end of next year. But you know, there is so much value that goes on underneath the surface of streets. It needs to be properly managed and designed. Whereas at the moment, it's I think it's the government, the industry, banned it territory. People can shut things in wherever they like. Of course, it excludes the possibility of putting in street trees and underground refuse collection bins, which do a great deal of tidying up the streets.
Mark, please.
Hi guys, I think like a little bit of added experience of Carlton Vale, because we commissioned a GPR survey to fully understand the utilities under the streets, and it was about £65 per metre squared. But I think the point of the utilities company is overcharging. When we got a quotation from the gas company, they were going to charge £7.5 million for the gas pipe, which were that's $1 million more than we have for the project. So I think it's actually, I think having some of that kind of regulatory framework to bring them back on board and say, look, a reasonable sum to move a gas pipe is £50,000 or something that's much more traditional in terms of quantifiable and measured, as opposed to a figure they just seem to dream up. And that's certainly our experience. But I think the GPR survey is something you don't always get. You know, you get old services or they don't really know what's there. And commissioning that GPR survey gives you that below ground picture as such.
And are they pretty reliable, GPR surveys?
In our experience, it wasn't bad, but I think we're doing another project in Waltham Forest, and it's actually discovered the old tram lines which are still there. So it looks really good on plan, but they know certain things such as gas, it'll say it's a metre deep, but then you still get things such as unknown service or dead end service. So they're good, but they're expensive, you know, for the whole of Britain to have a GPR survey would be very expensive.
There's a British BSI CAS 128 and 256, a publicly available standard 128 and 256 on the positioning of underground assets. They apply a gradation of precision of location, starting from desk surveys through to GPR through actual investigations, you know, physical investigations, what underneath. So, sorry, that's a bit of a technical point, but it's important to be aware of these things. Otherwise, we're talking just in vague generalities. You know, it wouldn't be nice. Well, yes, it would be. So let's actually know what's underneath the street. Let's find the spaces and let's use them. Let's sweat the asset.
Well, thank you very much to all our speakers, the audience, to Robert for doing all the electronics and online. Thank you so much, and rather for taking time to. Yeah, thank you.